Okay, hey, good afternoon. I'm Kevin Stamey. I'm the Director of Information Dominance. I work for the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Acquisition Technology and Logistics. And I'm responsible for the acquisition and programming of our C2 and ISR systems, as well as our cyber programs. And I have the privilege of monitoring our panel on autonomous systems today. Autonomous systems have been part of our warfighting systems for many years, but you'll hear from our panelists today about some of the new and emerging technologies that are enabling advancements in the use of autonomy in modern warfighting. With that, let me introduce my four partners from industry. So I'd like to first introduce Jerad Hayes. He's the Senior Director of Autonomous Aviation and Technology from Boeing. He has program management responsibility for air power teaming systems, development and fielding, QF-16 production and operations, and the support of automation aviation technology development. Also with us today is Dr. Jackie Hoke. She is the Associate Director of Unmanned Advanced Programs for Collins Aerospace Systems for Avionics. Dr. Hoke is responsible for the maturation and transition of integrated mission solutions for unmanned platforms. In her prior role, she was responsible for developing autonomy capabilities for emerging manned platforms. We also have Darren Moe, who's Senior Director of Automation, Autonomy, and Artificial Intelligence Mission Systems for General Atomics Aeronautical Systems Incorporated. He develops and deploys payload control processing and dissemination software, as well as the company's next generation user interface systems. His focus is employing automation and autonomy to enhance UAS operations. And lastly, Dr. Tim Barton is from Leidos, is a Leidos Senior Vice President, Tech Fellow, and Solutions Architect. And he is currently the Dynamics Group CTO, where he helps oversee all the technical aspects of the group's efforts, including a wide variety of senior systems and platforms. All right, and with that, let me talk about our ground rules for today. Each of our panelists will provide a few brief remarks about autonomous systems, and then I'll take questions from those of you online. When you submit your questions, please use the question and answer window, the Q&A window, not the chat function and not the raise hand functions. So I'll take those questions from the Q&A window. And with that, let me turn it over to Jarrod for his opening comments. Jarrod, over to you.
Thanks for that, Kevin. And just honored to be a part of such a distinguished panel today. So thanks for shepherding us through this, and thanks to all the fellow panelists for the discussion that we're going to have today. So just a little bit about what my perspective is on autonomous systems and how I see them evolving, not just today, but moving towards the future. You know, our environment is ever changing. We've got rapid proliferation of advanced threat systems that we have to counter, compounded with the fact that we're dealing with budgetary pressures and a need to simultaneously establish mass. So those two things compounded with the fact that technology is moving faster than ever, whether we're looking at advanced autonomous behaviors, artificial intelligence, whether that's just for the aircraft itself or for the mission systems as well, advanced manufacturing, and then advanced sensors and communications capabilities. All those are moving at breakneck speeds with regards to their individual technology advancements, and how they can complement and benefit autonomous systems is something that we all have to keep a close pulse on. Want to spend just a couple of minutes talking about how the environments are changing and how we see the evolution of autonomous systems progressing as we go through those environmental changes. You know, typically autonomous systems in the past had been utilized for what I would consider non-cooperative operations, where we have systems that are operating independently, prosecuting a single set of targets, and typically those target sets revolve around intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance collection missions. What we see as we move towards the future is more collaborative operations, and how autonomous systems are being brought into the fold and operating in close partnership with piloted aircraft and manned and piloted systems in order to compound and move capabilities forward. We also see a new range of mission sets where historically I think that autonomous systems were focused primarily on air and space. Now we see seabed to space operations evolving as something that autonomous systems are growing hold in. And then the other thing is with regards to advancement of autonomy is really we see a shift of moving from very intensive theater operations, meaning we have multiple operators that are operating a single unmanned remotely piloted aircraft, to where we're progressing towards fully autonomous operations, where we have one operator that is now controlling multiple assets in the fight. And that is a key element for us to focus on as we move forward, because it's really an enabler for game-changing capabilities in the battle space. You know, from my perspective, our focus as a community, as a group inside autonomous systems, is really on how do we establish the proof points that bring the technology to the necessary maturity level, and then we get it out into the field and we allow the operational community to exercise with it, come to grips with what the advantages are of autonomous systems, and then ultimately move them into operational vignettes, even at a broader scale than we are today. And so with that, I'll just leave it with you know, my position, and I think we'll have a great candid conversation about this today, is that we're really at that precipice where we're ready to adopt more broadly autonomous systems capabilities and features and bring them to the warfighter in order to increase our operational effectiveness and capability. With that, I'll end.
Thanks, Jarrod. So Jackie, let me turn it over to you for some opening comments.
Absolutely. So I actually wanted to focus on the open systems aspects of autonomy and autonomous systems. You know, it's fairly well understood, right, that the desire and role behind open systems initiatives has been to enable kind of plug and play replacement of hardware and software components on various platforms and systems. But there's an emerging set of initiatives within the DoD targeted towards developing family of systems to tackle those kind of evolving mission sets that Jerad mentioned, and conducting a wide range of missions in contested environments against near-peer adversaries. So this is kind of reinforcing the importance of open systems' role in the application of common hardware and software components across the different types of systems in these families. There's still a lot of work to do to achieve that goal. You know, that goal is really to what I would liken to developing a set of Legos, you know, hardware and software Legos that can be used to build up the desired capabilities within these systems to conduct the missions. You know, that's challenging because, for example, different target missions are going to drive towards different physical and functional solutions for these systems. You know, a highly swap constrained platform may require a mission computing solution, for example, that doesn't meet the computing needs for a less swap constrained platform that has to host a large array of autonomy functions to conduct its target mission set. And you know, this drive towards commonality potentially then goes to an even lower level. So in the case of a mission computer, for example, does it drive us towards commonality at a card level? But that increases the risk of increased complexity in maintaining an increasingly large number of both hardware and software components. So, you know, how do we solve this challenge? You know, I wanted to quickly share a little bit of Collins's perspective and, you know, how we're tackling this. And it really does start from the mission and looking at how we can establish an open architecture and model-based decomposition of that future battle space. So what exactly does that mean? Well, we've analyzed the ConOps from a variety of different mission sets that are necessary to execute, you know, the JADC2 operations. And we did this not only for unmanned platforms within that battle space, but also for manned platforms, and as well as looking at the role various assets like LEO satellite constellations even play. And interestingly enough, we identified over 200 distinct functions necessary to play all of these different roles and execute the mission sets. And then we moved those using digital engineering techniques into a model-based representation. Now, it's a functional representation, but we also captured the interfaces to these functions. The digital engineering methods allow us then to conduct architectural trade studies, both from a physical and a functional standpoint, and focus on applying autonomy capabilities in areas and ways that maximize the benefit to achieving the mission objectives, right? Just because we can develop an autonomy function for something doesn't necessarily mean the value proposition is there, right? Should we automate everything? Do we develop autonomy for everything, right? That's an open question. But then where do you go from there, right? You have this functional representation, but we've actually instantiated a development toolkit that allows us to create modular and maintainable components that can conform to a wide variety of open standards. We've looked at the different range of open standards, right? You know, there are a number, and the different parts of the service kind of prefer one over the other potentially. And there's an emerging set of autonomy architectures, right? So which do we adhere to, both from an open standards perspective and which of these autonomy architectures do we play? When we don't necessarily have the ability to drive towards any particular one, and that's why being able to accommodate a lot of them is incredibly important. But what this does is it allows us to rapidly integrate capabilities, both from a software and a hardware standpoint, that range across the TRL spectrum, and integrate those into an environment that allows for rapid testing, evaluation, and application to program needs. We've leveraged this to actually instantiate some mission systems for several different types of platforms. I'd say both manned and unmanned, and you know, look at that fully autonomous unmanned platform or an instantiation for a manned platform where we're really focused on offloading the workload, allow that operator to become more of a quarterback, you know, conducting the battle space as opposed to, you know, flying the aircraft and trying to task and directly control a specific unmanned asset. So how does this all relate back to open systems? Well, this digital engineering approach, you know, it's going to enable easy integration of capabilities across the government, industry, and academia, because that modeling of the functional interfaces enables rapid application of technologies that encompass one or more of those functional capabilities. And it allows for adaptation in that level of granularity, you know, and the component level detail that we have to try and model and maintain, you know, the various software and hardware elements at. And, you know, I think there's still definitely a lot of work to be done in the open system space and really achieving some of those true, you know, true objectives behind open systems and how we apply that to autonomy functions and autonomous systems. So.
All right, thanks, Jackie. Darren, let me next go to you for some opening comments. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much. It's great to be here with all these wonderful panelists. I wanted to give a perspective of autonomy in the general atomics aeronautical systems point of view as a UAS OEM. 2019 was actually a really incredible turning point regarding autonomous UAS, both internally at our company, with industry, and with the government. Our unmanned systems are very well known for having an armed strike capability on them. And in the past, it was always, hey, let's talk about automation, making manpower more efficient, but don't talk about autonomy. We don't want to be seen as, you know, Terminator, Skynet, making killer robots with no human in the loop. But that abruptly changed kind of in the early 2019 timeframe. It's probably no coincidence that the National Defense Strategy came out in 2018 and said there was a need for advanced autonomous systems. But also the technology was finally catching up to where we could start putting these things on board a medium altitude, long endurance aircraft. And I would also add that public acceptance of artificial intelligence had really started taking hold. In 2014, I feel like AI was starting to bubble up as a thing in terms of social media apps, smartphones, things like Uber and whatnot. And it's become less and less, again, going back to the Terminator analogy, people are seeing it as more of a part of their daily lives and not necessarily a threat. So this is all really good stuff. We've been pushing the envelope with our government partners towards this end state autonomy. And it's really great that we're finding government and industry partners that are really willing to do very rapid, agile development, being very willing to succeed or fail very quickly. But there's one inherent truth with autonomy, and as you add more on autonomy, there's definitely more a required acceptance of risk. And one thing that we're uncovering is that while we're working with some government partners that are very willing to take this risk, there are those in the government with very good reason that are trained to want to mitigate risk. And it could be areas of cybersecurity, it could be areas of airworthiness, but this is definitely one thing that we're finding. And the solution seems to be getting these parties talking early and often to start resolving these issues. Not that we've solved them, but getting those conversations going to kind of knock down some of these bureaucracies that may or may not apply to autonomous systems. This actually parlays into what Jared and Jackie were saying, I think. I don't think, so eventually we'll get to the point where a male UAS will be able to taxi, take off, transit, perform a mission all by itself. But there's not going to be a big bang where that's all going to happen. That fully autonomous system, is it 5, 10, 20 years away? I don't think anybody necessarily knows. But in the meantime, I think there's going to be a hybrid approach between autonomous operation and human in the loop. So one big example for that is, you can fly, one person can fly multiple aircraft today. It's technically possible, but the amount of risk one has to take in case there's like an emergency procedure or a dynamic part of the mission, it's relatively high now. But as we add autonomous subsystems onto the aircraft, doing something like one person controlling multiple aircraft becomes a much easier problem. So as we add these autonomous capabilities, there are going to be times of the mission that it's necessary for the aircraft to be autonomous. Imagine a comms denied environment where you cannot have a human in the loop. But up until that point, I assert that we still are going to have some kind of human in the loop control that'll be more efficient than how we do it today with throttles and rudder pedals and whatnot. But it'll be a transition that'll get us there. But I think probably one of the hardest places that'll get us to that end state is really the whole processing, exploitation, and dissemination piece. Making an aircraft fly autonomously, the technology's there, it's achievable. But the PED piece, for some missions, it's pretty black or white. Hey, I want you to find this particular target in a certain area of responsibility. But if you've ever been to a DGS and seen an airman do PED intel, it's very dynamic, and it's hard using today's narrow AI techniques, artificial intelligence techniques, to have AI that can adjust beyond the narrow specific tasks it's been trained to do. We do not have artificial general intelligence today in the world, but we may need to wait for those kinds of capabilities before we can have a truly fully end-to-end autonomous UAS. So hopefully that gave a snapshot as to some of the things that we're working through as a UAV manufacturer.
Great, Darren, thanks. So last, let me turn it over to Tim Barton. Tim.
Hey, good afternoon, and thanks for letting me be with you. And I enjoyed the words of the previous panelists, and hopefully I'll add a little bit to that. I'm a CTO at Leidos, and I just moved to Huntsville, Alabama, to be part of the Dynetics group down here. We're significantly involved in UAS and autonomy and those sorts of things from an air perspective. I came out of the defense group where we had significant autonomy in the maritime arena, from the seafloor all the way up to space. And I'd like to foot stomp a little bit the previous comments about architecture and open architecture. That makes all the difference, right? If you're going to do this in an affordable way where you can upgrade capability and get the latest and greatest capability out there to the warfighter, you have to have that. And there's a whole bunch of different architectures. It'd be nice if we settled on one, but we invent a new one every couple of years and we work through it. But the tenets are the same. But I'd also like to make the point that it's more than just software in that world, right? It's mechanical and electrical, right? You have to do all of that to make things upgradable, cost efficient. And when the government owns those architectures, they really can go out and get the best of breed from industry. a couple of points about mission. We all do autonomy to reduce cost and risk on current missions, but the most exciting thing is the new missions that are enabled by autonomy. Things you wouldn't have done before, going into areas you wouldn't have gone into before. That's the exciting part about it. But in order to make that happen, we're finding in our space a couple of things have to be used, and one of those is trusted autonomy. And I think a lot of us know what I mean by that, but trust means that it's cyber protected, that somebody can't get in and make you think that something's going on that's not, or try to fool it. And then you have to have the trust of the operators, right? Whether it's a pilot or somebody in a brick building managing the system, they have to know to trust it. When do they intervene? How do they intervene? We talk about man on the loop or in the loop, wherever they are, they have to trust it, and you have to train it like you fight it. So moving beyond that, I also want to foot stomp the comments made earlier about collaborative team autonomy. I've done a lot of countermeasure and countermeasure work, and boy, you really like to have spatial diversity and angle diversity on when you're trying to apply effects like that. And when you have man force structure that's augmented by an autonomous team, and the things can figure out where to go and what to do to apply it. You have multiple angles, multiple ranges, correlated signals, all of those kinds of things. That's almost, you can't do anything about it, right? It places a really hard problem on the adversary and makes them use their resources to deal with something that may or may not really be there. So I think some of those missions where we're bringing in cyber, EW, AIML, and collaborative autonomy are some of the really interesting things that are ahead of us. And in some ways we're doing it now, but there's some really incredible missions that can come out of that. So I think I'll stop there. Thanks.
All right, thanks, team. I'm going to kind of offer the first couple questions, so and we'll go kind of big to small as we get to some of the specific questions in the Q&A. And so all of you have talked a little bit about what's new in the field of autonomy. So I heard that we're shifting towards from non-cooperative to cooperative. We now have some new open standards that we didn't necessarily have before. I heard that digital engineering and model-based systems engineering is one of the new tools that's enabling us to do things. Heard Darren talking about just kind of a shift towards the acceptance of autonomy, when I can remember actually seeing protest out in front of some of the prime contractors about no drones. And so there definitely has been a shift in the goodness of autonomy. And I heard about, there's also been a shift about, how much we trust in autonomy. Could each of you comment on, what else has changed? And in answering that, maybe talk about what you see as the next technological advances that's going to enable us to continue to increase the levels and mission effectiveness of autonomy. And so, Jarrod, I'll start with you.
Yeah, Kevin, thanks. What do I think has changed that's enabled this? I think it really hits on some of the things that Jackie was pointing out with regards to getting to an open systems architecture that allows you to rapidly and seamlessly incorporate not just new systems and sensors, but also features and functionality, whether those be software modules or services that the system needs. I really like what she said about starting in piloted aircraft, doing things that we would call decision aids and moving those into autonomous systems to drive more autonomy into them. I do believe that today we're at a point to where an aircraft can fly itself completely autonomously with no operator intervention. I think, as Tim mentioned, whether the operator's on the loop or is in the loop, those are all salient points, but the technology exists to go do it today. it really comes down to building that trust. And the only way we're going to build that trust is if we get it out there into the field, we start to, mature that as a part of some of those operational exercises and put it in the warfighter's hands and see what the game-changing effect that comes out of that is. I think every one of us have probably played in the modeling and simulation domain. We've analyzed this to death, right? We know this capability has fruit to bear, and bringing it forward at a pace that allows us to not just keep up with our adversary, but leapfrog our adversary is the challenge that's upon all of us.
All right, thanks, Darren. So Jackie, any additional thoughts to offer there?
One thing, actually, two quick things that I would add. Jarrod, you mentioned modeling and sim and how we've modeled and simmed these things to death. I think there still is a decent amount of growth that we're seeing in modeling and sim capabilities and our ability to more robustly model and simulate the operational environments and get even closer to reality in that environment. And incorporating various measures of trust. I know there are several initiatives ongoing related to how do we actually quantify trust. I'll say I'm really curious to see how those initiatives continue to evolve and the results that come out of them. I know they're very much in the early stages of that exploration, but I think that's gonna make great strides towards building that trust and establishing the trust. I completely agree that the proof is in the pudding and you got to get it out there and see it. One other thing I think that's very much enabling the growth and explosion within autonomy capabilities is we always talk about the explosion and advancement of computing power, but we continue to see advancements in our in mission computing and the ability to do more processing in more swap constrained form factors. And I know there's a lot of research in quantum computing and things like that, and it'll be very, very interesting to see how that accelerates the utility of autonomy functions.
Thanks, Jackie. Hey, Darren.
Yeah, I would just, a different kind of area that I would add on is anybody that's done anything with artificial intelligence or machine learning knows that the secret sauce is data, and not just data, but labeled data used to train the artificial intelligence. So today it's kind of a brute force as far as collecting the data. Yes, we have lots of platforms out there, but not necessarily of the future targets that we necessarily need to be preparing for and training our autonomous systems to prosecute, if you will. So I think an enabling technology, which I'm seeing starting to get some momentum largely in the private sector, is the ability to generate synthetic data. So this synthetic data is great because it not only produces the multi-int data, but also self-labels it. So there's lots of solutions today to do electro-optical or infrared full motion video, but we need solutions for comment, ELINT, anti-submarine warfare, you name it. So I think this is an area that is starting to emerge, and it's going to be more and more important, especially as we try to tackle scenarios that we don't necessarily have eyes on today with the same kinds of assets.
Thanks, Darren. And Tim, any final thoughts there?
Yeah, I'll come back to agility for just a second. We talked about open architecture sort of enabling that, but the whole point of that is to stay ahead of our threats, right? And so the comment was made about digital engineering. One interesting thing that we see is trying to take the ambiguity out of the mission for the robot that may be out there, whether it's working with man force structure or it's on its own or in a team. If you had the modeling and simulation capability that underlies digital engineering in the design and development phase of these kinds of things, if you had that under the mission planning hood, right, and you could work through those billions of simulations to try to remove situations that the aircraft or boat or UUV hasn't seen before in a mission, it gets to the trust, right? You've worked all that out. The mission planners understand it. The autonomous behaviors in the robot understands it, and it becomes sort of if-then kinds of statements, right? You've reduced the cognitive burden on the device itself, and not just a warfighter. And so we're seeing a trend of, you hear digital engineering quite a bit in the design and development phase sorts of things, but failover mechanisms, when the platform fails, is there some digital twin that can take over somewhere? And finally, taking that digital twin and putting it in the mission planning systems and having it run through all the what if scenarios, so to get the ambiguity out of it. And that gets to that trusted autonomy thing that we talked about earlier. And finally, I would add the area of explainable autonomy is getting to be really important, especially in night environments where these things go out. You don't get to talk to them, you don't get to hear from them, and it might be weeks or months, right? Not usually with aircraft, but some of the other autonomous platforms we deal with go away for a long time. And you have to be able to plan a mission. An operator just explain to this machine that it's got to go out and do something in a very easy, military context. And then when it comes back, what did it do and why did it do it? And how did it do it in operator speak, right? Not autonomy nerd speak, right? Those kinds of things are getting to be very important back to the trust, right? Do I really trust this thing to do what I intend it to do? So I'll stop there. Thank you.
All right. Hey, thanks, Tim. So we've got a couple of questions in the chat about data. So Darren, you talked about the data necessary to train AI. Jarrod, you talked about the ability to have collaboration, which obviously requires data and communication between platforms. And so the nature of the question is, what are we doing to develop strategies to feed the data that's necessary to train AI to enable collaboration? Can you talk to any of you want to comment on the strategies that you guys are looking at to provide that data, and I guess, are there things that we, the Department of Defense, need to be doing to create the data necessary for your systems to operate? And I'll open up to any of you who want to comment.
I'll jump in. So I would say there's a kind of two-pronged strategy that we're doing as we're developing autonomous systems with our government partners. And that is leveraging all of the assets that we have out there. So again, for the example of MQ-9, which is sitting behind me in the picture, we already have certain payloads on there, but we are adding more futuristic or different kinds of payloads that support maybe more strategic type missions. Without going into a lot of details, we're starting to equip the aircraft with more and more of those to capture more of the data we need to train AI for more of that near peer fight, as opposed to today's counter-violent extremist organization fight. So that's one thing we're doing, taking advantage of the platforms we have today and adding more of those next-gen payloads for that next mission beyond the coin mission. And then the other one is really just kind of piggybacking on what I said before, which is generating the ability to create the synthetic data. It's great to, again, collect real data and bring it back, but there's only so many scenarios. So if you had an A2AD scenario where you are alone and unafraid, over a enemy, we can't collect that data today. We have to be able to simulate that. So you have to take that great modeling and simulation, and then somehow turn that into synthetic data that trains the AI that matches that modeling and simulation.
Good, thanks, Darren.
One thing I would add to that is the multimodality, multiple modality sensor systems, right? Where you've got different looks at the same target, and then using AI on top of that to look for correlations that human beings miss, right? That's becoming really important. So how do you take that multi-sensor data, fuse it together in a way, and then have the AI look for correlations that suddenly make low observable things really observable? Or sometimes there's a really really interesting finding there that we find, and sometimes that makes all the difference, right? When you know something about the phenomenology that the adversary doesn't, and sometimes it's just a simple correlation with multiple looks at the same target. So.
Yeah, Kevin, I'll just add another thought maybe to pile on something that Tim and Darren have already indicated, but you know, the need to establish data to train these algorithms is critical that we do it in parallel with the emergence of new sensors, new aircraft, new systems in general. Otherwise, we get ourselves in this situation where we've got technology leading artificial intelligence, and I really think we have to have them where they're parallel. So a robust focus on modeling and simulation and realistic modeling and simulation that allows us to feed the data into the AI algorithms to do those machine learning and training algorithms is going to be critical for the Defense Department in general as this technology moves forward. So that's got to be a keen focus as we drive this forward.
Yep, I'll just chime in and I'll foot stomp the importance of the modeling and sim and ability to generate the data, and come at it from a little bit of a maybe slightly different perspective. You know, some of the you know, leading edge expertise in AI and autonomy may reside within, you know, small business entities or you know, academia even, who have challenges in getting access to the data that does exist for, you know, reasons such as classification, right? And so how, if you have those barriers, can you you know, best exploit that expertise and that knowledge and apply it to the challenges that we're seeing if we don't have an ability to generate data that can be utilized to train to train those algorithms. So, you know, it makes M&S even more important from that perspective.
Hey, Kevin, can I make one more quick point on that? Jackie reminded me of something that's really important. She said,
looks like Tim froze up.
See more emphasis placed on.
Go ahead, you froze for
freeze up on?
keep going, you're back.
Okay, sorry. So there's a lot of companies that can do AI, right, and develop the models and keep those things going. But we'd like to see more emphasis on making the model generation based on the data upgradable, you know, sustainable, maintainable in the field by the operators, right? We've not spent a lot of time and money on that as an industry, and that's where we got to get in conjunction with that open systems architecture. So those models and algorithms can be changed very quickly as the threat changes. So.
Right. So there's a few questions in the Q&A about open systems. So let me kind of paraphrase a few of them. So you know, there's a common perception that open architecture in modular systems are bad for industry. I'd like you to comment on that perception.
I'll jump in on that one too. It's great for industry. So in the past, I can understand why somebody would make that comment, but this autonomy problem is way bigger than any one organization, company, big or small, government can do on their own. It's a team effort. It has to be a horizontal integration across you know, multiple entities to make this happen. It's very, very, very complex problem. I mean, like I said in my opening comments, this is the PED piece you have to do on board the aircraft. That by itself is just a mammoth problem. It just takes so many resources and so much ingenuity and so many people. And the open mission systems, of course, is great. I remember the earlier comment about how I think Tim made about every 2 years, there's a new open standard. And so one difficult thing is that we have to support all of them. So for right now, what we're flying on our autonomous demonstrators is we have OMS, we have FACE, you have SANAC 4586. You got all these, you know, different things in there, and that's fine. So that's a little bit of a headache, but at the same time, it's really essential to get the best of breed components. So I would say it is helping us get to our end goal of autonomy much quicker than we could ever do by ourselves.
I would add that it's only bad for industry partners that maybe have a nice proprietary platform where they want to own everything, right? But it really is the way that the Department of Defense is going to get the best of breed, right? By integrating across all of industry, right? The best sensor, the best algorithm, the best fusion device, and the best platforms, right? It's the only way it's going to happen, because like Darren said, no one outfit can do it all.
And open systems don't inherently mean we lose our IP, right? I think that's the common kind of misperception, right? I mean, you can still have your core nuggets that you're protecting as industry, right? But it's the interfaces, right? That's the important piece, is the interface and the definition of the interface and the ownership of the interface by the government, right? Because they have to be able to very rapidly replace a function or a set of functions when something better evolves, because technology is evolving so fast, right? But it does not impact our ability to still have our bread and butter and our IP and leverage that.
Yeah, and Kevin, I'll just jump in with one more point. This not just a key enabler for us as consumers of autonomous capabilities and integrators of systems. It also enables us to do that at a pace that's much faster than maybe what we had done historically. So it's not just the latest and greatest. It's not just the cheapest. It's also the fastest to the field is really what's key. So, you'll look at capabilities that are out there today. Sometimes it takes us months, years to integrate new features into systems. What we're really trying to get to is how do we get that inside weeks, days, hours in order to drive those advanced capabilities, whether they're software or new sensors.
Great, thanks. And so the other one that was out there, all of you have kind of commented about there's lots of different standards out there. Any thoughts on how we kind of coalesce on the best of breed standards, or what can the government, Department of Defense do to kind of to bring that together so industry isn't trying to develop to multiple standards? Is there something that we need to be doing to kind of steward that and shape that standard development effort?
I'm finding that it's very service dependent. So Air Force, OMS, Army base, and still using UCS, which is not as prevalent as it was 10 years ago. So we're kind of finding it's on those lines primarily. So if it's possible to get the coordination on that front, that would be wonderful. But it seems like that we had zero traction on that over the past 10 or so years.
I would say, so Jackie touched on this. Most of my experience is through the Navy, and their version of that is the UMA architecture, right? And but that was developed by the Navy sort of standardizing it, but it had lots of industry partners that weighed in on it, right? Councils and where we worked really hard to define what the interfaces were, where did they want modularity? You can't have modularity everywhere because it's not affordable. But where are the important parts on modularity? One thing I'd like to see in platforms, and one thing that I think the Navy's done pretty well is we talk about mission autonomy, but helping manage the subsystems on any platform, right? Having autonomy manage the propulsion or manage the radios and things like that. So all of those things are really important and extend missions if done properly. But you have to, I'll just end there, right? It's managing subsystems is important to that architecture issue.
Sorry, trying to find the mute button here. So let me hit one more question, and then I'll as I search through the Q&A questions. Tim, you talked about systems that can stay up for a long time, and Jarrod, you talked about systems being able to pretty much do anything today, but the systems of the past were good at doing exactly what they told them to do, but some of the things we're trying to do now is to have AI. Can you talk about what advancements are necessary so that unmanned autonomous systems can actually orient and react to unexpected changes in the environment versus just doing what they've been planned to do?
So I'll take a shot at that. So you have to have the way we break it down on some of our platforms is you've got situational awareness sensors or platform safety sensors, right? And pick your platform. It could be a ship, could be aircraft, whatever. But there's autonomy associated with those things, right? So they're keeping track of the weather, they're keeping track of altitude, they're keeping track of light, all of those things, right? And those factor in towards what are integrated with whatever payload you have on board and whatever its sensing capability is. But how you fuse those sort of situational awareness sensors with whatever payload sensing you've got really are, how does this thing sense changes in the situational awareness or sense changes in the environment and factors that into the mission plan and changes it on the fly as necessary, so that it doesn't do just what you told it to do, but it figures out what's the best thing to do given changes in the environment. And that's fundamental. Otherwise, your missions get cut short pretty quick if you don't have that kind of capability. So, over.
Yeah, Tim. Let me try to pile on that just a little bit. So, from my perspective, there's two core types of behaviors we're trying to develop here. There's deterministic behaviors, meaning we've got a rule-based set of decision aids that are going into any one of the systems. And then there's really this progression that we're talking about towards artificial intelligence that gets towards non-deterministic behaviors, where the system is, as Tim's talking about, surveilling the environment, understanding what its surroundings are, making the best decision possible. And what we're really talking about as a community is how do we move from that deterministic behavior set? How do we use artificial intelligence in a modeling and simulation environment to train new algorithms that, in my opinion, create new deterministic logic sets that are more advanced and more capable, and then get those to the field? And then we have to take the next step, which is, when are we ready to truly move towards the end state of truly non-deterministic systems that are in operation? And I think, Tim, you mentioned this, Darren, maybe you mentioned it, talking about trust and autonomy. That's really the journey towards gaining trust in fully non-deterministic capabilities in autonomy that we're talking about. It's not going to happen overnight, and it has to happen not just in a modeling and simulation behind closed doors. It has to happen in the flight environment, where we're out flying aircraft, we're sailing ships, and we're working with satellites that all have these behaviors on them.
And I mean, and one of the key, right, I think that's kind of a perfect setup for one of the things I wanted to mention is, one of the other key advancements that we need in parallel to that, not just with, from the standpoint of like human trust in these systems, is really a way to satisfy, Darren touched on the folks that are inherently risk adverse, right? What are the safety impacts of that? What level of risk are we willing to take from a safety standpoint when we start to incorporate non-deterministic solutions into these systems, and developing means for trying to assure the safety of the autonomy systems? And I think there are a number of programs looking at that, and making advancements in how can we ensure the safety of a learning system.
Yeah, there's not a really good vAWS process for non-deterministic stuff.
Right.
So we talk about the modeling and simulation of the AI, and the other side of the system engineering V, we have the vAWS piece, and there's a brute force way to do it, I suppose, but it's never like you have your test plan now and you check the box that it did it. It's never be that simple. So I at least in my world, these techniques have not been created yet. It's still very brute force.
Okay, so let me shift to maybe a little different topic. We've talked uniquely about autonomous systems, but a couple of you have mentioned how we're actually looking at pairing of autonomous systems with manned systems. And there's a question in the chat about a specific program that I won't name, but can you talk about what you can talk about? Some of the things you're doing, the ideas that we need to be thinking about in how we actually team manned and unmanned systems, and how all of that can actually improve our warfighting capabilities.
Yeah, so I'll jump in Kevin. I'll take a first swing at this, and then everybody else can pile on. At Boeing, what we're really focused on is how do we use an autonomous asset as an extension of the piloted aircraft, whether that's a HAVA, a fighter, a strategic bomber, whatever it is. We're really focused on how do we extend the effects. So think reach, lethality, surveillance for those assets. And how do we do so in a safe manner? What Jackie said was spot on. We have to have trust that the aircraft is going to either do what it's told or do what it's supposed to do in the battle space to ensure safety of operations. And so there's a lot of focus on that with regards to developing these autonomous behaviors. I think a step forward for autonomous systems is when you have an autonomous aircraft that is no longer joined by a piloted aircraft. When you have, the win is when you have a piloted aircraft that is joined by an autonomous aircraft. And for those of you that understand what it means to fly in close proximity to one another, you understand the significance of that. It is easier to follow an autonomous asset than it is to have an autonomous asset follow you safely, maintain formation patterns, et cetera, et cetera. So that's really the journey we're on, and the technology is close, very close.
And the key, right? The key is I'll use the term supervisory control, or I mentioned the term a quarterback earlier, right? Man-unmanned teaming is not effective if the human is still substantially in the loop and having to give detailed tasking or take direct control of that unmanned asset. We really need to develop, I've heard the term playbook autonomy is out there, right? Then that's where the reference to the quarterback comes in. But really to be able to give generic tasking and have the autonomous assets understand what to go do with it. Put the human on the loop instead of in the loop, and enable that, force multiplication, right? Of forgive the cliche, right? But of 1 + 1 = 3.
I would add to that something I mentioned before is that manned-unmanned teaming is a really cost-effective, low-risk way to get to the distributed effects that you want, right? How do you overwhelm your adversary, right, and or make them use their resources very quickly with just a small number of manned aircraft? Well, you do that by spatial and angle diversity, and with small cheap things that are flying along with you, right? And it's the only way to get to it quickly and cost effectively without putting more humans at risk, right?
Right. So all of you have talked about trust, reliability, risk. Can you comment on what you see as sort of those greatest areas that we have to get over for increased trust, and things like, you've got a SolarWinds attack that kind of keeps me up at night. That's a very sophisticated attack, and we don't even know yet the full extent of that attack and where they might be. Some of them might even be targeted your very companies. We've got 5G networks that we may have to rely on in other countries, that European countries relying on Chinese technology. Are there some other things that you think are key that we have to address in terms of getting over our risk aversion, or getting over what's going to be necessary to have the appropriate levels of trust to utilize autonomous systems in the most effective, optimal ways?
I'd say, in the cyber world, we talked a lot about architecture. I would say, zero trust architectures, right, where nobody's trusted. Every sensor, every path in has to be dealt with, whether it's a radar or a fathometer or anything like that. It all has to be properly dealt with, because you can get into these things, and you don't want them being turned off, you don't want them being spoofed, you don't want them being overtaken by an adversary. One of the things that we deal with in the autonomous ship world is, realizing this is an Air Force panel, but if you're doing collision regulations, driving a particular way on the surface of the ocean, if your adversary knows that, he doesn't ever have to get onto your system, right? He just has to get in your way every once in a while, you know, using a fishing boat. And if he knows you're doing collision regulations, you're going to maneuver out of the way. But that one little maneuver might take you off target, right? And so the normal cyber stuff we always worry about, you got to do that. But you also have to, there's an extension to how do you protect the behaviors? How does the autonomous platform know when somebody's messing with it, right? Or trying to get in the old-fashioned way, or trying to herd your robot, so to speak, into doing something that you wouldn't want it to do. So that's something I would add back to trust.
Any other thoughts?
I'll foot stomp what Tim said earlier. You know, he mentioned the term explainability. You know, in that manned-unmanned teaming scenario, right? If the unmanned asset does something that the human operator doesn't understand why they did it, or it's not transparent why they did it, it's actually going to have a net negative impact on the team and their ability to execute their missions. So it is going to be really, really critical to develop, you know, explainable autonomy and you know, interfaces that allow the human to easily understand what is happening and why.
Yeah, and I'll just add one more comment. So to me, you take it to extremes. How do you gain trust? Well, you really have to get it to a point to where the system is operating with either no or very limited communications, and the output behavior of it is predictable, and that it does what it's supposed to do. That's the only way we can really get to a point to where we have sufficient level of autonomy to drive assured operations in the modern combat battle space.
And just quickly, I'll add, and this kind of goes more towards the airworthiness side, is that it's very important to have a strict decoupling of the mission autonomy system, which is controlling payloads, generating mission plans, doing the onboard processing and exploitation, with the autopilot. So very cyber secure and rigid rule sets that flight critical software does not let the airplane do anything stupid, for lack of better terms, and violate any airspaces or collisions, et cetera.
Great. So we've got a couple minutes left. So are there, panelists, are there any of the questions in the chat that you see that we haven't addressed that you'd like to comment on?
I'm good. Thank you.
Okay.
I think real quick, one good question was what's the best way for a small company to work with a big company or OEM? And we do this all the time, partner or just talk to. Not every person we talk to has got something that's added value, but many times there are. And I would say just reach out to the company. We're always very excited to have partners, big and small, whether it's the companies represented on this panel or small businesses. We work with everybody, and we're very happy to work with everybody because a lot of the coolest innovations, especially in the synthetic data part I was talking about earlier, are coming from small startup businesses.
Great. Okay, as we wrap it up, I just want to say thank you to all of you for your time. Appreciate all the work. We hear General Brown talk about accelerate, change, or lose. You guys are the people that are actually accelerating change. So I just want to say thanks for what you and your companies are doing to accelerate change and bring real capability to the Department of Defense and in the Air Force. So thank you. Thanks for your time. Thanks for the great questions that were out there. I hope this was useful for you and you learned something today. And with that, we'll wrap it up here. So thanks everyone. Have a great afternoon. Good weekend. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.